Você vai fazer
The broadcast is live. So I guess we all are.
Yes.
Então, bem-vindas todos, todas e todes a esse encontro realmente muito especial em que a Academia de Curadoria recebe Steve Kurtz, um artista que foi um dos fundadores do Critical Art Ensemble, que é um grupo bastante potente em termos de desobediência civil e ativismo hoje. Eu vou apresentar um pouco o trabalho do nosso grupo rapidamente, né, para que os nossos convidados, convidadas e convidados possam nos conhecer, e vou passar a palavra à Ana Roman, que também é do grupo, para poder apresentar o Steve e o Critical Art. O grupo Academia de Curadoria é um grupo de pesquisa registrado no CNPq e que desenvolve não apenas pesquisas internas, né, para o grupo, mas também externas para instituições que não podem contar por questões orçamentárias, estruturais, com uma realidade ideal para desenvolverem projetos curatoriais. Então, desse modo, a Academia de Curadoria desenvolve projetos curatoriais que também são pedagógicos para essas instituições e vem de uma experiência primeira que foi desenvolvida na Casa Niemeyer da Universidade de Brasília. Nesse momento, o nosso grupo conta com membros em Brasília, São Paulo e Portugal, e esperamos em breve poder receber novos membros de outros lugares do Brasil. Eu vou traduzir essa entrada para o Steve poder entender o que eu estou dizendo, e aí vou passar a minha fala à Ana. So I was presenting our Curatorial Praxis Academy group. We are a research group based in the University of Brasilia, but with members in São Paulo and Portugal. Our activities consist in developing pedagogical curatorial projects for other art institutions which cannot count on proper budgets and that resist and insist to go on working from a precarious structure. So, Anna, if you may, please present our guest.
Yes. Thank you, Ana. Meu nome é Ana Roman. Obrigada a todos por estarem aqui com a gente. Eu vou apresentar agora o Steve e o Caê, e logo em seguida eu vou falar um pouco sobre como vai ser a dinâmica do nosso encontro hoje. Steve Kurtz é professor emérito e membro fundador do Critical Art Ensemble. O CAE, coletivo americano formado em 1987, é um premiado coletivo de artistas que trabalham com técnicas variadas, como a produção de imagens digitais, web design, wetware, vídeo, fotografia, texto, livro, instalações e performances, com a intenção de investigar as intersecções entre arte, tecnologia, ativismo político e teoria crítica. O grupo já escreveu 8 livros sobre resistência cultural, sendo o último deles intitulado Aesthetics, Necropolitics and Environmental Struggle. As publicações do CAE já foram traduzidas para mais de 20 idiomas. Nessa breve apresentação que eu fiz, eu queria ressaltar que o CAE já trabalha há mais de 30 anos, então é uma longa história que a gente vai ouvir hoje, e o encontro vai ser conduzido em inglês, mas todas as perguntas podem ser enviadas no chat em português, que a gente vai ter um tempinho para serem traduzidas e para conversar. Então, por favor, mandem perguntas, mesmo em português, e estaremos aqui para mediar essa conversa hoje. Steve, you can present now. Thank you very much for being here.
It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And many of you don't know, but this is our first live lecture in Brazil. So it's quite an honor, and we're really enthusiastic to be able to do this because I think Brazil and the US share a lot of crises in common right now. And maybe this is a good way we can have some discussion here at the end of the talk and exchange some ideas on what can be done. So I'm opening with an interventionist workshop that we did recently in Havana, in Cuba. And the reason I'm opening up with it is because before we get to all the high production value projects that we have done and the more complicated ones, I thought it might be nice to remember that simple gestures can often be extraordinarily effective. So when we started in Cuba, this was a new opening to me, but the workshop began with the reading of the law that we were right on the line of breaking. To do art in Cuba, you have to be state sanctioned, and if you're not, it's 15 years in jail, and they're pretty serious about enforcing that. So you have to be quite careful on how things are done. And whenever you're working in a very authoritarian place like Cuba or Russia or China, the rules are quite different, and it really requires at times the simple gesture. It's not the time for the big project. And it's amazing how effective they can actually be. In this particular case, we just made t-shirts and stickers. And the t-shirt said, "We can trust one another." Now, everybody knew what that meant, what kind of the subversive content of that phrase was. But at the same time, the authorities couldn't really do anything about it because it says something so positive that could easily be a state-sanctioned slogan of some kind. Even though not many people read it that way. So it was something quite simple. And for them, for the folks that were doing this and that were really risking their freedom, really risking their autonomy, really risking their own bodies in doing this and putting on these t-shirts and sticking these stickers around, this was a serious blow against the empire. I mean, they truly believed that this was a foundational act of resistance, that they were really saying something that otherwise could never be said. So it's just something I want to throw out there that, you know, we don't always have to be like hyper creative, thinking of the most complex, most exciting, most seductive kind of work that we can, the most original kind of work. Sometimes it just takes this, something very simple. So to go on with that theme, just to demonstrate it in kind of very much our early years, it's from a project called Are We There Yet? And what we were engaging was camper culture, people who basically are on the road all the time in their Winnebagos, and they travel from spot to spot. And one of the things that we wanted to show was the omnipresent police state that surrounds these places that are supposed to be vacation spots, that one can experience personal autonomy to its fullest. And we wanted to show that, well, not really. I mean, as long as you're comporting with certain norms, particularly the norms of the commodity, well, yeah, you can kind of do what you want to do. This is Daytona Beach. You can see people are driving on the beach and they're jumping off cranes and they're getting drunk and whatever else. But just a slight deviation from that norm, all those things that I just mentioned, you pay for. And trouble starts very quickly. And this happened everywhere we did it. What you can see is Ricardo Dominguez. He's setting up a small little toy car track. He's pulling out toys from his bag. We loaded the dice a little bit to make it a little extra weird. We put a Burger King crown on his head. And all he does is get out some toy cars and push them around the track. Doesn't say anything. He doesn't engage the audience. It's just a simple gesture of pushing a car. Now, this breaks a very serious norm that adults should not be playing with children's toys. And you can see how quickly a crowd gathers, and wherever a crowd gathers, the police are sure to follow. And what those two police officers are discussing among themselves is what crime they should arrest him for if he doesn't stop playing with those cars. And one of the things that I certainly try to teach all my students when they're going to go out to do public interventions is you have to remember anybody can be arrested at any time. And this seems to be true in any country, that there are laws on the books that the police can just decide you're guilty of and take you to jail. You might win your case and be found not guilty in the court of law, but that doesn't stop you from police taking you into jail, if not something worse. So this was kind of like a consistent gesture, and what it meant to these people who thought they were having a great time and expressing their freedoms, all of a sudden came to realize how easy it would be to be arrested. And that was a lesson to us too. And so it was something that we always tried to think through from that point on whenever we were going to do public work. Now, in addition to the street actions we were working on at this time in the early 90s, we were also trying to figure out how we could navigate the digital world for resistant purposes. And I need to kind of set this up with a little bit of context for everybody of what was happening at that particular point in the early 90s. It was a time that the activist left was very enthused, and morale in some ways was very high. And the reason that was because of so many victories that had been won in the various HIV campaigns, particularly by the group ACT UP. ACT UP, we started a chapter of that. Critical Art started a chapter of that here in Florida. Ours could not be quite as militant as the chapters in New York and San Francisco, much different in the South. Rules are different. But there was a real belief that those who own the streets had a very strong political voice. But by 92, 93, what we were seeing as we went to these demos is the police had learned to deal with these street tactics. They figured out instead of trying to arrest everyone and dragging people around and making all of this awful PR for themselves, it was a lot easier to just put up some roadblocks, reroute the traffic, let them yell and scream for a few hours. They're going to get cold and tired. Half of them are sick, and they're just going to go home. And then everything can go back to normal again. And so we came to the belief that, well, a lot of material infrastructure, particularly in cities, is really not all that valuable, particularly in a time of digital communication, right? The web has just gone online. The dot-com boom is in its infancy. And we thought, well, what if we change tactics? Instead of trying to block a street, what happens when you block an information flow? That's perhaps what we should start doing. And for a little while, this was actually possible, that we could take over databases, information transfers, and so on. And that had a lot more power, because power at that time really didn't depend on the streets. You moved to wherever resistant wasn't. That is what the digital world offered the elites, the capitalists, the bourgeois, is it gave them more movement. It gave them yet another escape route through which business could continue uninterrupted. And so we began developing that theory about electronic civil disobedience and how it could be done, and worked with some hackers. As with most things that work, it didn't take long for laws to be passed to make that illegal. I mean, now if you tried anything like that, you would get in substantial trouble, and you probably should be in Russia. I mean, just recently, what electronic civil disobedience has really turned into is ransomware. It's the same theory, only they're blackmailing for money instead of for social justice. Right? We just had a major pipeline shut down that stopped everything in the southeast of the United States for quite a while, all done digitally, and the ransom was paid. The ransomers, who were at least in Russia, we don't know if they were Russians, they got their money. And this is what we'll find with a lot of tactics, is eventually they are taken back one way or another by different types of criminals. Sometimes it's the legit criminals that take them back. Sometimes it's the illegitimate criminals that take them back. But most of where we see these openings and places for interventions and provocations, they do get sealed up if they're effective. You have so long that you can do it. So these were the two elements we were working of. How do we proceed with public intervention on one hand in real space, and what do we do with digital intervention in virtual space? And that's really what we were targeting in the 90s. But late in the 90s, we came to the conclusion that we had a new problem, something to us that brand new on the horizon, right? And not that the new virtual space didn't have its novelty. It certainly did, but it seemed to us as if it was just a scaling up of a problem that was already there. It was a scaling up of spectacle. Right? So whether it went from radio, TV, film to the internet, it was just more, right? It would, and certainly what this scaling up did do was to allow for globalization in a very real sense, in a sense just unheard of prior to this ability to have instant international communications at a very inexpensive, if not free, rate. But we were looking at this other revolution that was happening, and that was the revolution in the flesh. And our opinion was, we could be bombarded by the spectacle. We could be bombarded by the internet. We could be pushed and we could be nudged, although those theories of behavioral economics hadn't really quite emerged yet. We could be pushed and nudged, but the body seemed somewhat sacrosanct. But once molecular biology revolutionized itself and became, a clear, complex, advanced discipline, we have a new problem. And that new problem to us was they would be able to program our bodies to be predisposed to the messages that they sent through spectacle, right? That now we're looking at a real totality of capitalist inscription on everything, on all material goods and on all human bodies, both inside and outside. That to us struck us as new. And we took a detour and really took a deep dive into where molecular biology was going and what we thought would happen to it once it was filtered through capitalism and its imperialist adventurism. So this is one of the first projects that we did, Flesh Machine. And what we were looking at, we were half wrong, half right on this, was what we thought would be the newly designed flesh, right? And our thinking went as such. One, the nuclear family in advanced capitalist countries is the norm. The extended family has been pretty much eliminated. So the fate of the children, which there's only going to be one or two, is it's got to come out right the first time. It's not like during the extended family days when you could have 10 kids and you might lose a couple to childhood disease and some might want to stay on the farm, but you know, a couple might off to college and who knows. This kind of option wasn't so much on the table any longer. And then, of course, the other thing of late capitalism in the system of abundance was everything becomes a commodity. So why wouldn't reproduction also become a commodity? Why would you not be able to buy genetic advantage? And why would capitalism not sell it? Right? There was a lot of talk that they weren't going to do it, but they did it. And we started looking around and seeing how many fertility clinics there were, and then how those fertility clinics were promoting their products. And they were basically promoting them through an ill-informed idea of genetics, but one that worked. Marketing-wise, it was quite brilliant. It sounded quite logical that if, you know, we got the genes from someone with a very high IQ who was very successful in life, that success could be passed on if you just wanted to pay to get the donor's genes. And we thought with the kind of competition that capitalism inspires, that this would catch on relatively quickly. And that's the part we were wrong on. We were expecting by 2021 that the flesh market would be huge, that almost everyone would be doing it. And we were quite incorrect about that. But the underlying theory of new eugenics and how it's being used in fertility clinics, with the wealthy, for the most part, being the experimental group, that part seems to hold up pretty well. So we wanted to kind of spread this message around. And as you saw, you know, in the last one, we got in trouble with police. You know, when we did the "Are We There Yet?", the police always came. In Cuba, we were arrested twice and interrogated and eventually let go because there wasn't anything they could really do to Americans. We were worried about the people in the workshop. That's who we were afraid for. The police arrested one for buying some paint without a license. That took a day to get him out. Anyway, back to Flesh Machine. Here's the kind of press that this project was generating, Let's Kill Baby. And as you might expect, the conservative Catholic and evangelical response was not happy with this project. So a lot of the places we went, there was a lot of protesters and picket lines. And in Vienna, I had to debate the Archbishop of Salzburg over whether we should be doing artwork like this or not. And what the artwork looked like was this, is when you first came in, we sat you down in front of computers and you could take a real application test to be a donor, an egg donor or a sperm donor. But mainly it would apply to egg donors. So you could take this test and we wrote a script that would fail you, you would be rejected, or you would be given a certificate of genetic merit, in which case you could continue in the process. And I think we did a pretty decent job with the script. I mean, I have a high degree of confidence in it. We have to remember when donors are selected, it's usually a meeting of doctors and a consensus is reached. There's a process. And we couldn't replicate that. But we knew what they rejected and we knew what they thought were good attributes. So we could write the script in accordance with that. So people would take the test. It was a very, very high failure rate. It was pretty tough to pass the course. But if you did, you could go on, and we had a cryopreservation lab set up. So we could freeze your cells and keep them going. And we would also take a blood sample so we could sequence some of your genes. But mostly what we did for that was just go ahead and replicate it until the genetic material became visible and kind of gave them out as souvenirs. I mean, you can see how old-timey this is. Look, it's that thermocycle is like the size of a barrel. By 2004, I had one that could fit on my desk, my desktop PCR. So it was a little bit different when we first started working. So you would get that, you would get blood, and we would take a picture and work up a whole genetic profile of the person and could evaluate what they could sell their genetic products for on the open market. And the learning curve for people was how clearly there would be a division of labor based on genetic merit. Right? People could see the alienation that was going to emerge out of this very fast when so many are failing and getting pushed aside and others are proceeding and being treated, given the royal treatment. Everyone knows this is an art performance, but it didn't seem to matter. Kind of the brain effect still worked of like, how come I am not included in this? And lots of people really wanted to know, for what reason did I fail? For most people, it's because they use drugs. That was one of that would get you kicked right out. And I can also say, Critical Art Ensemble, we all took the test and we all failed. So we couldn't even go on in our same performance. So that was the power of that one. It was a real moment in showing how a new division of labor was emerging based on one's genes and what could be written with one's genes. And now with CRISPR, we're getting into even crazier stages, but that's another story. Okay, back to the street. This was kind of just a fortunate thing that happened. And it was when we were in South Australia for a festival, and I was out in the parking lot smoking, and an Aboriginal guy came out who was also smoking. We struck up a conversation. It turned out he was from the Ghana tribe, and he was very excited because they had found some lost books, so they were going to be able to revive their language. And I was like, wow, that sounds pretty cool. And they're like, yeah, so, since Australia, for the most part, was dual naming everything, one its European name, its colonial name, and then one original people's name. They were like, well, we're hoping we can rename Victoria Square, right? The worst imperialist of all times, that we can rename it Tardenyunga, its original name. And I said, well, let's go ahead and do that. And he said, well, we've been trying, but the city council has really been trying to stop us. They don't want to do it. And I said, well, how about we just find out where the city makes their signs, we go make them, we take down the Victoria signs, and we put up the Tardenyunga signs. He's like, great idea, but we have to get permission from the elders. And that took a bit. But the elders eventually came around to it, and we waited for an opportunity when there was a great deal of activity in the park. There was a big live concert, And as you can see, we put on our orange vests and we took down half the Victoria Square signs and put up Tartanyunga and left them. Now, while we were doing this, a smart reporter was watching us and came up and said, "What are you guys doing?" And we just, "Oh, we're from the city, just changing the signs, dual naming the place." And he said, "You guys are not from the city. There is no legislation to dual name this park. So what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, look, here's my name and number. Give me a call and we'll explain the whole thing." And he said, "Okay." And happily said nothing more. Anyway, he did call me and I told him what we were doing and he wrote a big article about it. And we said, now I don't think we could have done this, but it was a great threat. And we said, you know, you can take them down, but we're going to keep putting them up. We're going to keep putting them up until it's dual named. Now, I'm not saying we had anything to do that, or our threat or our action made this happen, but 6 weeks later, that park was dual named. So it's Tartanyunga again today. So we're trying to keep this balance, you know, of oscillating in these different directions, into these different spheres, whether it's an organic sphere, a virtual sphere, or the material sphere of the street, trying to work at kind of as many levels as we could. Okay, here's another one that we did. And this was one that wasn't even meant to be a provocation. It was just meant to be funny. And we were working with kids from the Nova Scotia School of Art and Design. They asked us to come do an intervention with them. And what they decided was that Canada was a place of apologies. The Canadians like to apologize for a lot, and they believed in their city there were things to apologize for, and we could make a walking tour of these sites and express our sorrow. So that's what we did. There's the pamphlet in front of you. The statue is the founder of Halifax. He is most famously known for putting a 10 pounds reward for all Indian scalps to try and push all the natives out of Nova Scotia. So he got a sorry. And we had lots of ways to do it. We had bricks we could do it. We had little flags. We had little digital tags that we could use depending on the context, so that, you know, we could kind of fit it in with the design of the environment. So here's one. This was Africville, the site of Africville. And this at the time was in the mid 60s, the largest grouping of people of color in Nova Scotia. And the city council, having seen the Watts riots in the US, decided that this area needed to be dispersed. So not only were they going to remove everyone from their housing that lived in Africville, they were also going to see that they couldn't go anywhere as a community, that they would be dispersed all over Canada or wherever else they wanted to go. They just couldn't go in big groups, so that the town couldn't reestablish itself somewhere else and be a problem, quote unquote, problem for some other government. So that one, we were nice about most of them and made them all removable. But this one, we cemented those sorries into the ground. And you can see some of the other things, the penis-shaped kiosk that got a sorry flag. You can see our little pamphlet there in the upper right. We went down to the tourist hall and put it in there. The lower left, that is actually a public sculpture, the worst one I maybe have ever seen in my life. It's supposed to be a wave in honor of Halifax's maritime culture. And this last one down here in the corner right, the digital tag, that's one that we put on a ferry, which was probably a mistake because the digital tags worked well in banks and department stores and such like. But it was probably a mistake to put it on a ferry because there aren't digital tags there. And as you can see, it's 2002, so 9/11 is fresh, terrorism is fresh in everybody's mind. And lo and behold, this would be the first time Critical Art Ensemble was called a group of terrorists. And what happened, at least as far as we know, is after that we put that tag up, it's actually a young woman who really didn't even want to be in the workshop. She was there because her boyfriend wanted to be in the workshop, who on the way home put the tag up, was wanted by the police. They knew it was a woman who did it, but they had no description. They would have never found her. Anyway, how we found out was after doing the intervention, we went off to the beach and cooked some lobsters and had a great time. And the next day I said to one of the students, we should go get the newspaper, see if anybody noticed anything. Maybe the culture reporter might have noticed and covered it. And he comes back with 2 papers, both headlines. I think they noticed. So apparently someone on the ferry found it, took it down, and you could see the scale of it. I mean, it's just a digital screen. And it said, "We're sorry that for the raw sewage being poured into the harbor." And they brought it to their boss, and their boss went, "Well, you can never be too careful." And they did a bad mistake. They called the police. And the police came, decided it was a bomb, closed the entire harbor to all traffic, closed all the bridges going over the harbor, and declared Halifax under terrorist attack. So we were in a lot of trouble. It was time for us to leave Canada. And we've had to leave a number of countries this way. But for this one, that really, as the headline says, it was just a prank. You didn't really need to shut down the whole harbor for a digital tag that's like 2 inches by 3 inches. But they did. And so that also gave us a kind of pause of, we better look more closely at design so that whatever the artifacts are that we use, they don't stand out in an unseemly way. And also, we were never allowed back into Nova Scotia again. Okay, this is where we believe we got on the FBI's radar. It might have been earlier, but this is where we think that started. We can't tell for sure. I mean, I got my file from Freedom of Information Act. It's 3,500 pages long, but every line is redacted. So we don't know we only know how long it is. That's how much we know. For molecular invasion, we were at the Corcoran, right? So we have this big powerhouse DC museum platform. The other show that was in there at the time was Jackie Kennedy's ball gowns. So it tells you what kind of place it is. And we got the idea that we could find a way to, through genetic targeting, we could find a way to kill Monsanto products, Roundup Ready products, and not kill anything else. Right? So if we could find a way to attack the genes that Monsanto had modified in their corn, soy, and canola, we basically could kill them while not harming anything else in the ecosystem. And this was a pretty annoying time too. Monsanto was suing farmers because pollen from their crops would blow into other organic farmers' field, destroying their seed banks. And then Monsanto would sue them for basically for copyright infringement or patent infringement, right? That they were stealing their intellectual property. So, I mean, the history of Monsanto, if corporations really were people like they are said to be here in the US, this one would have been taken out and shot decades ago. But this is what they were up to, and this is how they were strong-arming more and more farmers into buying their products. So we were really interested in making a farming defense kit. And we found something that would work. Pyridoxal 5-phosphate, which was kind of a vitamin B of sorts. And when mixed with sunshine and Roundup Ready herbicide, it would kill those plants. Right? So we had a way to kill them. And we thought, you know, if the pollen drifts over into an organic farmer's field, it's not our fault if our powders get picked up by the wind and drift over into Monsanto's fields. And, you know, we said this, the newspapers, the DC newspapers covered it. And of course, before you know it, there's like a dozen Monsanto lawyers in the museum with cease and desist orders and telling us we were all going to be sued and that we're going to that it needs to be shut down, which I'm happy to say the curators had some backbone and did not do it. A lesson to curators everywhere. They stood by the exhibition and stood by us. And as it happened, Monsanto didn't do anything. Although, you know, it would be interesting because clearly we were not licensed to use their product. The way we got it was Claire Pentecost, who was working with us on this project and who lives in the Midwest. She went out to the seed stores and tried to buy some. They, of course, couldn't sell it to her because she wasn't licensed to get it. But eventually one seed store guy went, look, we have bags of this stuff break open and we throw them in the dumpster. Wink, wink. So Claire goes looking in the dumpster and there's bags of it, man. So, you know, we had a bunch of it. We had plenty so we got to do this provocation a number of times. So I don't know if it ever had quite the effect that it did in Washington, D.C. So we made it, got away with it. I'm pretty sure got put on the FBI radar, that's when they started really watching us. And yeah, that story is going to come back. So here was the follow-up, and we were primarily doing this one for Europe, because Europe, you know, has to label all their products and say whether it's GMO free or not. And we were thinking, God, with the amount of grains that are sent all around the world, how could you possibly keep the genetically modified grain at an industrial level from the non-genetically modified grain? In our worries here, we weren't really worried about the health issues, you know, and I think by this time that's been pretty well proven that all the health scares were just that. What we were worried about was a handful of corporations controlling the world food supply. That would really be a problem. And that's the discussion we wanted to bring people to understand this was happening. A new kind of monopoly that was being built, and it was being built to leverage people's stomachs. And so we asked them, you know, if you have grain-based materials, you would like us to test them to see if they are genetically modified when they claim not to be, we'll be happy to do it. So the results. Now, obviously, this was not scientific in any way. I mean, our sampling methods were not sampling methods by any stretch of the imagination. They were just kind of random and small, and, you know, from a scientific perspective, these results don't mean anything. They're just completely impressionistic. But here is the impression. In Holland, everything checked out. If it was marked GMO-free, it was GMO-free. In Germany, it was about 50-50. Sometimes, yeah, it was GMO-free when it said so. And then other times, nope, those old cornflakes, they were genetically modified. And then in Austria, this was the kicker, because, you know, the Austrians are so militant about their food and how it's part of their culture. It was all contaminated, everything we tested. And we didn't make a scandal of it. We probably should have. But, you know, we were already in enough hot water in Austria. We never ever getting to go back there anyway. So we didn't. But it was very interesting for the people that were there. And yeah, it kind of gave them a lesson in what you should believe and what you shouldn't. Okay, so after those two projects, the FBI had had enough. This is them in front of my house. I was arrested for bioterrorism. And then eventually charged with wire fraud and mail fraud. It took 4 years, but, you know, we finally got it thrown out of court. But we learned another very big lesson, is you might beat the rap, but you don't beat the process. You know, they confiscated my house, they confiscated my car. You know, thank God for all the artists that helped me through auctions and such like, or I would have lost my home for sure. And that, and it helped me to get it back. So another thing we were doing around that time was when we had written Marching Plague, and we were doing target deception. And what that was is various places were inviting us to come and recreate germ warfare experiments from the 50s and 60s, using simulants, of course, not the real thing, but germs that behave like the real thing. And we were asked to do it in Germany, and we had to report, well, there weren't any tests in Germany. It's not England or Canada or the US. You know, Hitler was a rocket guy. He did not like germs. He was a germaphobe. So there was no germ warfare program. And they said, well, okay, well, do another one, but just do it here in Germany. And so we kind of did the San Francisco reenactment. It wasn't exact, because, you know, where we were in Leipzig wasn't really coastal. So, you know, this was mostly done on the coast, and kind of the germs were shot over the water into the city. But we did the best we could. So we had a human guinea pig core. There you can see them in front of you. And that's based on something real as well. That's based on some Seventh-day Adventists in the 50s during the Cold War who are pacifists. They said, look, we might be pacifists, but we're not cowards, and we're ready to serve our country. And the military said, well, we've got a job for you. And what they used them for was to test different pathogens on them. So they really did use them as these volunteer human guinea pig force. Another great moment in American history. So we had our guinea pigs, and we marched them along, and what we ended up doing, since this was an American thing, is we surrounded the American consulate and tried to see if we could spray the American consulate from a mile away. Now, here was another big lesson for us. We were driving around looking for the site to set up the spray station. And clearly the perfect one with the wind directions and everything was the city town hall. And I'm thinking to myself, we cannot go in that town hall and ask if we can use their tower to spray some stuff around the city. I wasn't even going to say, you know, spray Bacillus subtilis, which is what we were using, a ubiquitous, safe bacteria that functions kind of like anthrax. And the curator said, no, we can go in there and ask them. I was like, this is going to go really bad. I'm expecting the cops any second. And he goes in and tells them, look, we need to use it on Saturday. We know you're closed. It's going to be a few guys. They're going to have some equipment. They're going to go up on the roof. They're going to spray some things. It's for an art project. We'll clean it up afterwards. We'll let ourselves out and lock up. And I'm just thinking, this is impossible. And the manager in charge of the tower says, that sounds fine. Here are the keys. Just gave us the keys. So this was a great lesson of how the state can really get into your head, right? How authority gets in there and tries to stop you and tries to make you sabotage your own project. It was a real learning experience. It was one where it's like, okay, we have to rethink when we're thinking too hard about the disciplinary comeback. But at this time, I'm on pre-trial probation, and we were pretty worried about it, everything, because I really didn't want to wait for trial in jail. Okay, so we did that one. We marched everybody back, and as always with all our experiments regarding germ warfare, it didn't work. We didn't hit anybody. This is why germ warfare programs were canceled. The reason we were interested in talking about them again is because the Bush II administration, that never met a weapon it didn't like, had restarted against the treaties, the biowarfare treaties, had restarted the germ warfare programs in America. So we were quite interested in showing the absurdity of these things, and these little demos that we would do of the actual tests from our historic past would let people know just how absurd this development was and what a waste of money it was. Now there I am, again. So this is the Institute for Microbiology in Leipzig. The curator just called them and said, hey, we're bringing some samples. Can you streak them out and tell us what's in them? Now, I don't know about you, but if the guy you're seeing standing on the steps there gave me a bunch of bacterial samples, I don't know if I would have taken those. But again, there's that authority getting into your head. They were totally on board with helping us in this project. All right, here's one that the planets really have to line up if you're going to do it. And that is, what we wanted to do was to protect lands from developers, right? Whether it was wetlands or woods or squatters' places, whatever. And in Italy, the stars lined up as we found an endangered species that you could get domestic seeds for. That's the kicker, because you can't go out and take seeds from an endangered plant. That's really illegal. And there was strong endangered species legislation. So what we thought would be a couple of weeks, we'd go, we'd plant these seeds, we'd grow some, and then we'd plant them in different places that needed protecting. Actually turned into a one-year project when we got a farmer to help us. And he said, look, you've got to give these plants at least a year in an open greenhouse so that they can get used to all the seasons and harden up. Because if you just plant them after they sprout, they're just going to die. And happily, all our assistants and colleagues there did it. They looked after these plants for a year, and we went and planted them. Now, the bad thing is when it comes to the courts, as we all know, those who have the most money win, and that's the developers. So all we could really do in many cases was stop them for a while. And then, like in the case of the squats, when they would come to bulldoze them, you could get really good footage of them running over endangered species. And this was Cupid's dart. I mean, it's this nice little Piedmont flower that everybody loves. So it's really bad publicity for them. But there is a limit. It's not a permanent solution, as we hoped for. All right, here's one. Here's a bit of institutional critique. We normally don't do that too much, but we couldn't resist in the case of Documenta. What we wanted to show was to give people a real experience of the separation of people due to differences in economic wealth. So we made a banner, it's like 20 meters, for which we could proportionally show the difference in wealth between like 99% of the people cut into quintiles. So the tallest, richest people up there, you know, the 80% to 99%. They're kind of way up there. Rest of us are much more on this human scale. And some of us are even below the line. That's usually students, by the way, mainly American students who have racked up these enormous debts for college payment. So, man, you guys are so lucky that it's free there, because it's just killing the younger generations here to go to school. But for the top 1%, the banner would have had to have been 270 meters high, and we couldn't do that. So instead, we got a helicopter to take people straight up 270 meters, and things look really different from up there when you look down. And it gives people a real embodied experience, a real perceptual experience of what that difference in wealth means. Now, the other thing that we were doing was to try to use the language of the festival. We did it on VIP day, so all the most important curators and buyers and whatever else were there. And those helicopters, because we needed one that could go straight up and down, so we had to have a 2-engine, they're loud. They're really loud. The noise pollution was pretty bad. And of course, you know, they're not the most efficient at burning fuel either. So, you know, we got a lot of flack of like, how could you do this? You're supposed to be an ecologically minded group. And it's more, we just answered, look, we're just showing you in real time what's being done at this festival. First, it's a destination festival. The art world is decamping and flying from all over the world to middle of nowhere Germany to come look at art. And you're blaming us because we use a helicopter for one day? And the really kind of more amusing moment for us in this was we got to divide the classes. For those who couldn't afford a guaranteed lift on the helicopter, which we made the paper out of money, and you know, we did letterpress, and so it's all handmade. And if you paid 200 euros, you could get right on the helicopter. And they sold. We saw almost no rich people. I think it was one of those situations where, you know, it's better to have the tickets and not need them than to need them and not have them. And for, you know, and for lots of people at Documenta, 200 euros, that's a bottle of wine at dinner. For everyone else, they got a scratch lotto card. And they could win a ride, and it cost any coin you had from any denomination of any currency from around the world. So that helped people see the difference of what was going on. But back to the pollution problem. And this was, it's very much like when you're in your freshman class and you first learn about commodity fetishism, that commodities aren't these magic things that just appear in store windows, that there's actually resources, and those resources have to be gained, and then they have to be refined, and then they have to be manufactured, and then they have to be put together, and then they have to be transported, and then they have to be put in the window. I mean, that there is this long labor process. It's like, okay, we all know that. That seemed to be completely forgotten, because where we got the idea from the helicopter was because we were by the L'Orangerie, and for those of you that know Documenta, it leads into the sculpture park. So the rich people can have their coffee with a lemon twist and then stroll through the park to look at the sculpture. And it never occurred to them, how did that sculpture get there? Well, the way it got there was by helicopter. It's flown in. It's not like it magically appeared there. So there you go. You know, that was kind of like a two-parter, a couple of layers into that particular project. See, we're running out of time, and I'd really like to have time for question and answer. This one, just to go over very quickly, was a project we did in the town square in Toronto. And to make a monument that was dialogic instead of unilaterally monologic. So we tried to think of what would a monument look like that the oil companies would really like. And this is a time over the great debate over whether the tar sands in Canada should be exploited and then pipelined through the United States into the Gulf of Mexico. And we tried to make the best argument we could, basing it that, you know, you could cut imperial adventurism if you had your homegrown oil supply. Lots of people were quite upset. And if you did, I mean, it's thousands and thousands of people that attend this event. And we had our spokesperson, we hired an actor to be the public relations vice president for Can American Energy, which we made up and built them a web page. And you know, they were quite something for a while in all the papers. And then we made the counter argument. And we had an oil spill, a simulated one, because it's been too dangerous to do a real one. But we did a simulated oil spill into the town hall fountain. The pipeline broke. Mess was everywhere. And you can see now the clear water, it's all black. We had like taggers come in and tag the tanks with skulls, much to the enjoyment and enthusiasm of the crowd. I'm not sure, I think they like that even better than the oil spill. While leaving the pro oil video running. So I think to some degree we got a dialogue going, but also we took it down the next day. It's not a monument that's going to bother people forever. You know, we tried to take as much of the authoritarian nature out of monuments, and in the monument with a helicopter, the monument to inequality as well. So always part of our goals. And I guess this is kind of a good slide to go out on. Then we had the emergency services come, shut down the square, tell everybody they had to go home, that it was time for them to leave. So with that, I will open it to questions and just say again that I'm really honored to be here to talk to colleagues and an audience that resistance is more than a word, right? That it's something that means you put your body on the line, you put your freedom on the line, and you do it for justice and equality, and you don't back down. It doesn't mean, oh, I dragged someone on Twitter today. It means that there's real risk involved. And for all of you who are here to talk about that, to enact that, I just say salute and thank you. So if it's question time, I'm going to reveal myself. I'm back.
Hello, it was amazing.
Amazing, Steve. Thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Yes, it would be. I would love to talk more about biotechnology and I don't know, critical, a lot of things. Yeah, but we have some questions, so I think we can ask them. And
Awesome.
I'm going to say something em português, just a second. Pessoal que estiverem online, a gente vai ter certificados. Então o Matheus vai colocar aqui no chat um link e vocês podem preencher, um link direto para o Google Forms e a gente vai enviar um certificado automático ao final da palestra. Thank you. Yeah, it was about certificates. Sorry.
Academia, as always.
Yeah.
Anna, do you want to start making some of the questions we were planning to?
Yes, the first
Yeah,
question
we
that
can
we
do
have.
the questions. And
Yeah,
also, just let me say too, feel very free with the questions. I won't take things as being impolite or too personal. I mean, during my case, I had to live 4 years completely in the public spotlight. So whatever you want to know, don't think it'd be too indelicate to ask. Ask away. I'm here to answer whatever.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Actually, I think much more, not even because, we want to know a lot from your personal life, but because when we're speaking in another language, sometimes we don't have the vocabulary specifically to ask in a polite way. But thank you very much, Steve.
Sure.
Yeah. Pessoas que quiserem perguntar no chat, ele falou que pode perguntar, enfim, qualquer coisa da vida dele e, enfim, vida pessoal também está envolvida aí com possibilidade de pergunta, sobretudo porque o trabalho dele tem uma relação direta com a vida dele enquanto ativista, então, artista e ativista. Então, acho que as coisas ficam um pouco complexas, enfim, mas sintam-se à vontade também de mandar perguntas nesse sentido. Bom, let's start. So, let's go. First of all, we would like to ask you a little bit about social media nowadays. What do you believe social media is an instrument of real social transformation? Because, sometimes when you have, for example, hashtags and this kind of stuff, and a lot of people is all the time posting it, and they really believe they are making some changes in society. But I would like to hear more about your perception on that matter.
Well, there's, like with all things, there's the good and there's the bad. I can say that much of the digital scene in the 90s was only possible because of the digital world, right? I mean, all those people could have never found each other. There was little pockets of us here and there all over the world. We were able to connect, we were able to organize. And that's still true today, even more so now. And that's the upside of social media. I mean, as an organizational tool, it's fantastic. I mean, it's really, really good. The downside, of course, I mean, hashtags are not going to get anything done. There's no power behind them. And, that's why I said at the end of my talk, it's about, and I know people in Brazil know this because I see it on the news constantly. It requires serious risk if you want social change. And, Twitter's not going to provide that. Facebook, it's not going to happen. And if it's for any kind of revolutionary moment, you're definitely seeing it in the United States. And it's for the worse, right? All these pushes and nudges, all these people that just take what's fed to them. And what do we get from that? We have insanity here. I mean, just flat out insanity going on. We have, 50-40% of our population that lives in a complete fantasy land. And that's possible to do because of these spheres of influence that have been carved out through social media. I mean, you can really bring out the pathologies in people. And if there's anything revolutionary going on, that's what's happening, is they have figured out how to bring out the pathologies. They have figured out how to amplify addictive predispositions. I mean, behavioral economics, while it could be, and sometimes is, used for good, it's mostly used for bad, and its strength is through social media. You know, my idea is I don't look at anything fed to me. As if you're going to go on it, only read stuff that you looked for yourself. That's how to use it. Don't take anything that comes to you. That goes in the delete. You know, that's what happens with that. And you know, something like Twitter, I wouldn't even go on that. It's also very lead in terms of what populations and different demographics are thinking. It really perverts that. So I'm not a huge social media fan as a type of activism, but I am a big fan of it as an infrastructure for activism. Yeah.
Exactly in that, well, I'm echoing here, I don't know why. But I just want to take this Anna's question a bit further, and thank you for your answer, and ask you in that area, you know, digitally, how do you think it is possible in such a precarious and unequal reality like the one we face here, even more so now, not only because of the pandemic, because of the crisis generated by the pandemic as well. So most of our political programs, social political programs were suspended, and well, we are even more unequal than we were before. And I would like to know, if you could, in your opinion, how can Brazilian artists promote disobedient acts digitally while our life goes on being pandemic? Because it doesn't seem like we're getting out of this reality too soon. And also, how can academia help? So you were yourself, or you are yourself, a professor. How can academia help these acts? We as an institution, although we're a public institution, we're also very much accused of promoting the establishment, right? And our force, the way we're working now, is actually to go on the contrary of that. So we art professors, artists that teach, and everyone that works in public universities nowadays in Brazil are trying to help disobedient acts by artists, students, and so on. So, Steve, in your opinion, what more can we do in order to promote civil disobedience, although we are an institution?
Yeah, well, I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you on this. At least in terms of what can you do during a pandemic, you know, and it's terrible because the powers that be, pandemics don't slow them down. You know, just like it's the same here in the U.S. The gap between rich and poor just in the year of the pandemic has exploded. I mean, it's crazy how much richer the rich are now. They don't even know what to do with all their money at this point. It's even beyond using it for purposes of power. It's gotten that bad. But for us, that we have to think of the collective good, and kind of number one on doing that is stopping the pandemic. And so, you know, being limited to virtual tools, as I was saying, there's not much you can do if you're not a really proficient hacker. And if you do that, I mean, those laws don't fool around anymore. I mean, they are really serious felonies at this point if you start doing that. So I don't have a great answer other than, you know, is to take this time to reflect. And this is where academia can help, because you can still teach the techniques. You can still teach the law and how to protect yourself against and through the law. You know, there's things academia can do. That's for sure. You know, the pedagogical project doesn't have to stop. And, you know, it's here in the US, it's the opposite. The universities are accused of being these bastions of leftist activity when they are anything but that. It's like, clearly you have never been to a US university before if you think that. Because it is as right-wing as can possibly be. These are little mini neoliberal learning pods. And particularly the state schools are being changed away from pedagogy and into training, right? It's like, we're going to train you to work for the machine. We're not going to teach you how to think or anything like that. We're getting rid of English and the arts and these things that just get in the way, right? And we're going to train you to be plumbers and carpenters, and you can go out and make a living. The state universities are in real trouble. And, you know, the sciences, they're controlled by who gives them the grants. And that's not left-wing institutions that are doing that. You know, the business school, I don't even have to even start with them, right? I mean, all that nasty stuff we talked about of how online sociality is developed, that's them. That's them figuring out how do we monetize every cent? How do we drag it out of them? And who cares what happens to the consumer? That is just throwaway product right there. There's always going to be more. So, you know, I'm optimistic about what you guys can do as academics. I mean, like I said, in getting people trained in what they can and can't do. What if they get in the kind of trouble? What do you do? You know, what are the different tactical techniques and when are they most appropriate? Right? Thinking through these things and helping people to understand this type of process of art making, you know, which is very different from the old avant-garde process, right? I mean, these things, you know, it's not that I don't respect the old avant-garde, I do. I mean, that's what I grew out of, you know, but I had to like get it out of my system. It probably took 10 years to finally get all that residue that I had learned in graduate school about avant-gardism out, because it's not useful now. You know, it really isn't. That's just the bargain that some artists have with the financial institutions of culture, right? As you know, financial institution of culture says, we'll let you write what you want, you can paint whatever, go ahead, do whatever you want, you know, knock yourself out, but stick to art, right? I don't want to see you over in politics. I want to see you over in science. You can stick to art and we will sell it. You know, and so this new kind of process, which is, you know, just getting its footholds in universities, and whether it'll get to stay, I don't know. But it's just getting its foothold now. There's a lot of struggle for you guys. There's a lot you can do, and a lot of students that, you know, once they got it, and especially once they, you know, kind of gotten over their own fears and tested the waters some. I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, you can just see it getting passed down the generations. You know, it's a really lovely thing. So I am buying long on pedagogy, but I'm buying short on what we can really do with digital practice that's going to be effective in these kind of problems we're describing about inequality during a pandemic. Because I think our first duty is to stop it. that's number one. And that requires kind of staying home. No good activism. Activism, it's like, you know, the best pedagogy, it's got to be embodied. There have to be bodies. You know? So that's where we are.
Yeah. That's resisting, right?
Yeah.
Anna, do you have any more questions, or can we ask Steve some of the questions that the public is putting?
Yeah, I think Steve started talking about a subject that the public is touching in their questions. So we have a question from Hasp C. Maybe Mateus could put here, please. Yes, please. While the very rich are getting much, much richer during the pandemics, the poor are starving. Is that the struggle for life? Is it unfair not to talk about this? Is art a good way to pass the message? I think this inequality message.
Yeah, art's a great way to do it. You know, I mean, but what that depends on is where you're doing it, right? How are you disrupting that flow that is flowing up, and how do you redirect it to start flowing down? And of thinking of things, creative solutions. I mean, that's what artists like us do. That's and this if the pandemic was gone, the two giants, right? The two giants that we're facing, one is economic inequality, and CAE works on that every day. And the other is climate crisis, and CAE works on that every day. I didn't show that much of our eco work, but we do a lot of it. And it's the same thing. They have to be talked about. They are the perfect thing for art to talk about. I mean, here's where we can go back to where the avant-garde did some good, right? The avant-garde was some of the first in the 19th century and the early 20th century to talk about inequality and point their finger at it and illustrate it and make people see it, put it in their faces. Right? So yeah, we need to talk about that, and art is a top candidate for doing it. I think if you're thinking of the world through any kind of ethical lens, and putting your specialization through that lens, how could you not? I mean, just how could you not? It's 2 billion people that are starving. Thank you, capitalism. And it's not because there's not enough food. There is enough food. It's intentional. So yeah, we're gonna talk about that and keep talking.
Yeah, we need to. Yeah, I believe we need to. And we have another question. It's about like collaboration. You were talking about the presence of bodies and the necessity of bodies existing at the same time and provoking social movements and social changes. Could you tell us a little bit about how you work in CAE, if you collaborate with other groups, and how it starts? It's like it's a question about how you deal with collaboration.
Sure. And how is your process? I think most artists also are curious about how you make these contacts, how you guys work together.
Yeah. Those are necessary questions, and there's like lots of models out there. So our model is not always the most popular one. For one thing, it requires a great deal of trust between members, and it requires long-term commitment. And you find lots of collectives are usually short-term, a year to 5 years, and they kind of run their course, or people are sick. It's like bands, people are sick of each other after a while. There's that kind of thing. So there's got to be this bottom line infrastructure where you have to really like each other. That's the non-rational is so important here. It's not just, if you do it like a rational contract, it might work for a while, but it ain't going to work for long. Right? So you have to kind of actually like one another. That's the first thing. You have to be in it for the long term, to be really committed. Now, here's the harder part, is we try to not duplicate specializations. And this is why. In the very early days, when we had started ACT UP and we were doing actions down here in Florida, we would go kind of to the main base in New York. And and the cultural wing of ACT UP New York was this collective called Grand Fury, which you guys probably are aware of. They went to Brazil, and they were basically all designers. How those guys ever got anything done, I don't know. There was one woman, Marlene McCarty. I don't mean to leave her out. She was pivotal to the group. At the meeting, because they were gonna, work with us on a show we were doing down in Florida. I mean, I was ready to cry because it was like 2 hours of yelling. And I walked out. I said to Steve Barnes, my partner, I was like, man, all right, we are not duplicating anything, because each one thought they had the best design. And it's like, we're having one designer, Steve Barnes, that's you. You are designing everything. And so that's how we did it, is everyone has their niches. I mean, this is like when you ask me, you're like, well, is the whole collective going to come and talk? And it's like, well, no, because most of them don't like getting up in front of groups and talking. That is not something they're enthusiastic about. They like meeting people and hanging out and drinking and sitting around the table and talking, or small workshops. They're all in on that. But when it comes to, I'm just on stage by myself in the big audience, I prefer not to. And so that's, like, one of my jobs is doing words, right? It's doing the writing and doing the talking, because I was a professor. Steve Barnes's job is, he's a designer, and he's our computer expert, because that's what he does. Melissa is our photographer, because she's a photographer, right? It's, and kind of on it goes. We divided it all up that way. Some things we had to learn all together, like wetware, because that's kind of a team effort. It's hard for one person to just do it. But there's limits. I mean, we have our 5 people that we like to work with and we really trust, but sometimes we need a roboticist. It's like, well, I don't know how to do robotics. Or we need someone that has deep knowledge of some area of biology or ecology that we don't have. We need someone smarter. We need someone that's done deeper investigations, right? We need certain data that there's no way we can generate ourselves. And then we invite associates to come in and say, will you work with us for this project? So that when we're deficient somewhere, we get another specialist in to take up that specialty. The way topics come about is they select themselves, right? I mean, because like we're all in agreement. What should the topics be? Oh yeah, climate change, economic inequality. It's the topics. And so then what shapes them is where we're asked to do something or work with somebody, right? If other groups say, hey, can you come in and do a workshop with us, or can you come in and help us? We're trying to do this action. Can you come in and help? And it's like, yeah, yeah, sure. We can do that. And authority works through what we call floating hierarchy. So if, again, let's say it's a design question, we'll talk about it. And then Steve Barnes, who's the head designer, says, this is what we're doing. And then that's it, case closed. It's been decided. And so we've come full circle, because this is where I say, you got to trust the people you work with. So when they bring the hammer down, say discussion over, this is what we're doing, everyone's got to be ready to go along with it and say, yeah, I trust you. You've been right before. I believe you're right now. And let's go. So that's how that's how we get our ideas. That's how we're structured. And that's how decisions are made. The decisions of what the big issues are, those come through consensus, but those are easy to reach. They are not divisive. That's not the kind of thing that causes division. They select themselves. Like say the last piece I showed in Canada, right? How did we pick the oil industry? Well, it's because it was something that was right on the front burner between America and Canada at that time. So it was an easy choice. It's like, let's discuss it, because we both have big stakes in this issue. It's good. It's good all around.
Yes, it seems to us that all of you are great researchers, because you're so much in tune with, everything that is actually going on, specifically in the places where you're acting, right? So that's why it's so important for these bodies to be where the action is going to happen. But we have one last question. We're getting to the end, unfortunately. We could be here talking to you. And we're really, really happy to be here, and we would for sure be glad to have your full body here with us. And the last question is, Renata Hayes from our group asks that she found it really interesting that there is an ironic side to some of the works you do, and if you could talk about that, and how having a good mood and having an ironic side can actually be a part of the work and can help the actions.
Yeah, maybe is humor part of your creative process?
Yes. Yeah, it has to be to some extent, because people don't want to just get pounded with tragedy. If you want them to go away fast, that's going to do it. The two things you have to do is that you do have to make them feel like, I'm not going to get my heart torn out to participate in this. So that's one, and humor is a great way to take. It's gallows humor, right? I mean, it's a rough kind of humor, but it's a very necessary one. And the thing that has to combine with that is you have to be able to show people with your project what their personal stake is in what you're talking about, right? So when we did a thing like when we were testing food, we didn't say what we really want to talk about is food monopoly, because who wants to talk about that? I did not go to the museum today to have a talk about food monopolies. That's not, I'm here for some visual pleasure, please. And so that's why we started like, curious about your food? What's in it? We can independently test it. Everybody eats. And that brings them to the game. Because there were, particularly then when we did, there was a lot of paranoia about whether this is healthy or not. And it was a way to bring people in where they could see their stake right away. We did a project called Gentera, which was about genetically modified organisms and how to tell what ones are high risk and you should protest, and ones that it's probably not a danger to the environment, and how you tell the difference. Now, who wants to do a science project? And we were doing it in parks. Who wants a science project when you're taking a stroll through the park? I'm just walking my dog. For God's sake, don't make me learn about molecular biology or cell biology. But we built a robot that would release genetically modified E. coli, right? And most people know what E. coli. Again, it wasn't the dangerous kind. It was completely safe. But we're hitting two buttons there. One, something genetically modified, which people are naturally scared of, because mythologies pretty much universally say you shouldn't create life. That's God's domain. And when humans start messing with it, bad things happen. That moral is just everywhere. So people are scared of that. And then, it's a multi-billion-dollar disinfectant industry that's telling them you can't touch anything. So they're scared. So they're double scared. It's like, we've got genetically modified germs that are about to be released. And they become very interested to know whether they should hang around and this is interesting, or should they be getting their families out of there, right? I mean, sometimes we use a scare tactic like that to bring about the stake, but if the process works, at the end, they come out unafraid and informed, right? It's one of the good things artists can do. So yeah, those humor's it's got to be a part. It blunts the trauma. It's like a little shield that helps to make a hard discussion easier. It's a good insight.
On that note, thank you very much, Steve.
Yes.
It's been so mobilizing for us to hear you as an artist and as a professor, and it's really been very special for us to have someone who knows what we're going through and can talk to us in terms of creating together responses and ways that we can survive and resist while we need to go on working and go on contributing in a pedagogical project such as this one. So thank you very much. This was too short. And thank you for your time, for accepting this invitation. And in the name of our Academia de Curadoria, we all thank you. It's a group of only students and researchers. Some of them are getting here right now, so we have new members. Some more members are coming into the group next week. So we're going to try to expand this work that we do for free for institutions. And maybe in the near future, we can bring Critical Art Ensemble to be with us.
Yes, and please make a research about GMOs in Brazil.
We can totally do that. We've done it in Argentina. We did it in Argentina. Yeah. Man, you want to talk about a battlefront there. I should have shown that piece, maybe.
Well, there's everything. There's too many things you should have shown because everything just resonates so much with our history, and I think maybe Latin America for Critical Art Ensemble is just, it's so full of interesting themes and problems that we could work with. So,
I couldn't agree more.
Yes, we are here for you whenever you need. Please contact us, and we will be sure to contact you as soon as we can to actually receive you and the group, full bodies, among our team.
Virtual meetings too. I'm happy to do a virtual meeting again. If you find call for it or something we can help with, we are here. And like I said, I'm happy to take the time to do it.
Thank you.
It's wonderful. Much. Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you, everyone who was here. Obrigada a todos, todas e todes que estiveram conosco nessa conversa. E acho que a Ana ainda tem algo para dizer antes do encerramento.
Certificados mais uma vez. A gente vai deixar aberto o link para certificados por mais 15 minutos. Após esses 15 minutos, o link será encerrado. Então, se vocês não preencheram ainda, por favor, preencham a última chance. Muito obrigada por estarem aqui conosco hoje.
Até a próxima. Em breve teremos outros convidados e convidadas conversando conosco sobre assuntos absolutamente importantes do cenário da arte contemporânea hoje. Steve?
Thank you very much
again. See you soon. Thank you very much again.
Until the next time.
Cheers.
Goodbye.